With the demise of middle Cherrymon, the chosen children ought to have been left in high spirits. But unfortunately, their morale has been crushed. Not only was their victory arduous to achieve, but Leomon was killed in the process. Another in a short list of friends and acquaintances who have been dying on behalf of the children's ongoing mission to save the digital world. And so at this point in time, Tai Chi is questioning himself. Yamato is becoming more and more easily agitated, and Mimi is losing faith in their mission. Overall, everyone has been made restless. To make matters worse, as they walk through this forest, they're being spied upon by Pinokimon. The Dark Master watches them from afar, having installed a widespread surveillance system throughout the trees. And once again, Digimon Adventure keenly associates surveillance with nefariousness. Pinokimon is also accompanied by Kiwimon, one of many minions at his employ, and the bird seems to enjoy brown-nosing his master. Growing ever more impatient, Pinokimon fiddles with a remote control, which then triggers multiple conveyor belts that are hidden beneath the forest floor. And at that moment, the children are sent for a ride, presumably in the direction of Pinokimon's abode. In preparation for their arrival, the Dark Master digs through a toy box and retrieves what appears to be a .44 Magnum revolver. Eagerly, the Dark Master loads the gun and points it at Kiwimon. What's made readily apparent here is Pinokimon's complete disregard for the lives of even his minions. Everything and everyone are just his playthings. Meanwhile, the children have been left to escape the conveyor belt by climbing into the trees. And then as Tai Chi and Yamato argue as to what course of action to take next, the children begin to vanish. Made fearful at these ominous ongoings, Yamato begs Takeru to stay close, promising he'll do whatever it takes to protect him. Surprisingly, however, Takeru rejects the gesture.
僕たちみんなで力を合わせてここまで来たんだ。それなのに、どうしてお兄ちゃんは僕だけ特別扱いするの?
This is the kind of conversation that should have occurred aboard the subway train back in Tokyo.
僕だって一緒に戦ってきたんだよ。そうでしょ? 僕お荷物だった。お兄ちゃんにずっと守ってもらわなきゃいけないほど頼りない?
Much of what is rushed through the Dark Master's arc could have been initiated during the Vamdemon invasion arc, allowing these moments to make more sense. What I'm suggesting is that Yamato's resentment of Tai Chi could have been built up and led to much of his behavior here. Instead, what's odd about Yamato's behavior now is that his resentment comes after he and Tai Chi had combined forces and been the primary means of defeating Venom Vamdemon in the previous arc. He and Tai Chi were hand in hand, trusting each other as their Digimon partners achieved ultimate level status. Now, however, Yamato is being made to act like none of that ever happened. Nevertheless, Takeru's words take hold and are particularly impactful now considering what we know about his and Yamato's parents. Yamato's ongoing treatment of his younger brother was a heartfelt, if awkward, attempt to mend the damage done by their parents' divorce, and to re-establish that brotherly bond. Now, however, Yamato sees that kind of relationship, the kind that Tai Chi and Hikari have, will never be afforded to him. Takeru has grown beyond that. He instead sees Yamato as an equal. Moreover, Yamato's resentment is compounded by the fact that Takeru has also been taking after Tai Chi. Throughout their adventures, Tai Chi has been far more influential on Takeru than Yamato ever has been. But Takeru's words would indicate that this was all because Tai Chi treated him as an equal. And Tai Chi's resolve is also something Takeru desires to emulate himself. Now, through some voodoo magic, Pinokimon has scattered the children randomly throughout his forest. The Dark Master constructed several dolls in the likenesses of the chosen children, and he plays with them as he would pieces on a game board. Whatever Pinokimon does with the dolls also happens to the children. Thus, the puppet has become the Puppet Master, a toy playing with children. Interesting to note, he has no replicas of the Digimon partners. That and this isn't the first time there will be dolls made of the children. And so what we have here is a blatant misalignment between players and playthings, which would teach one about the nature of control and those who abuse it. The onion is layered a bit deeper when one considers the one in control here is in fact a marionette. The strings of the puppet are wielded by the puppet. Thematically, what Pinokimon is plays on an ongoing theme concerning the nature of evil. For in having a puppet be the puppeteer, we are also shown how evil turns the world upside down. Evil causes the natural order of things to unravel. And a secondary theme here is how from nature we may create things meant for our own hands to control, but those very things may end up controlling us. Now, Pinokimon soon grows bored with the dolls and immediately sets his sights on Takeru. And while it's not made readily apparent what draws Pinokimon to Takeru in particular, one may speculate that Takeru's being one of the youngest and smallest of the group made him a prime target. When the Dark Master finds Takeru, he lands right in the middle of an argument between him and Yamato. Pinokimon then demands Takeru come play with him at his mansion. The Dark Master then tosses Takeru a loaded machine gun, which is far too heavy for Takeru to hold properly, so he drops it. The gun then goes off as it hits the ground, frightening Takeru. Realizing the weapon was real, Takeru attempts to scold Pinokimon for nearly killing him. However, Pinokimon is undeterred.
当たり前だよ。本当に死んじゃうから面白いんじゃない。でも大丈夫。そんなに簡単には死なせないから。
The entire argument Takeru was having with Yamato before was about his insisting on being more adult-like. Therefore, Pinokimon's gesture, tossing him a weapon meant to be wielded by an adult, symbolically mocks Takeru. The Dark Master's very nature works in fascinating antithesis to the children and their ongoing journey of maturation. And while Yamato protests his brother being taken away, Pinokimon simply ties him up, and even threatens to outright kill him if Takeru doesn't comply. And so, with no alternative, Takeru goes along with the Dark Master, leaving his brother behind. The games begin shortly thereafter, and they are far more terrifying than anything we've seen thus far in the show. Now, in general, the show's violence has been colored by how fantastic it all is. In other words, we're not really made frightened by, say, Greymon's bellowing fire simply because of how outlandish a concept like that would be in reality. However, this scene here with Pinokimon and Takeru hits entirely differently. Back at the playhouse, the Dark Master begins firing a real pistol at Takeru, and even blasts a few of his own minions along the way, thoughtlessly killing them. The violence is made far more personal, and strikes a new chord, giving us a very different perspective about Pinokimon as opposed to the other villains of the show. And for a brief moment, the fantastic fighting that we've seen throughout the show takes a darker turn, which is, well, it's remarkable to say the least. When thinking fast, Takeru cleverly resorts to playing on Pinokimon's childishness. He casually declares that the game is boring and even goes so far as to mock Pinokimon for not having any real friends. And fascinatingly, rather than become angry, the Dark Master appears to be heartbroken. It's funny that this becomes his most pressing concern now, especially when he just murdered a bunch of his minions. But Takeru continues the ruse, leaving Pinokimon to hang his head in shame. YouTube user Dante Long has also keenly noted that Pinokimon makes no mention of the other Dark Masters here when Takeru prods him about not having any friends. Not even Piedmon. But kids just love clowns, right? And this all paints a better picture as to how the Dark Masters correlated outside their coming together to try to end the Chosen Children. One theorizes if the Chosen Children were not present, the Dark Masters might as well have turned on each other. And so, left perturbed by Takeru's words, Pinokimon goes off to literally make a friend, as in build one from scratch. Soon after, Takeru is reunited with Patamon, and the pair of them destroy Pinokimon's playroom before they make an escape. Outside, the other children reunite, and Yamato has been freed from his bindings. Before they can decide what to do next, however, they're set upon by Kiwimon. And here Tai Chi and Yamato decide to argue over how best to deal with him. Tai Chi wants to outright kill their enemy, while Yamato demands that they interrogate him. He wants to find his brother after all. And so after accusing Tai Chi of being blatantly inconsiderate, Yamato attempts to trigger Gabumon's warp evolution. That's kind of overkill for a fight against an adult-level Digimon, but regardless, nothing happens. Yamato's crest won't glow. Well, action then falls to Sora, and Piyomon evolves into Bergermon, who destroys Kiwimon in a blaze of fire. But this enrages Yamato and he sets his ire on Sora, and Taichi's made to step between them. But just then, Takeru makes an heroic return. He didn't need to be rescued after all. Takeru then recounts his story, and collectively the other children voice how proud they are of him, with Joe specifically remarking about how much he's grown. Yet amidst the ongoing praise, Yamato remains silent and his face falls. And then, without a word, he leaves and heads off into the forest. Now, Joe is the only one who takes notice, although it assumed that Yamato had to take a piss. Also worth noting is that when Joe tells everyone where Yamato headed off to, the part of the forest he points to is shrouded in darkness. Very ominous indeed. Sora then draws attention to Yamato's strange behavior as of late, in addition to Gabumon's sudden inability to evolve. And while some of them propose they go out and search for Yamato, Tailmon suggests they just wait for Yamato to come back on his own.
少し休んで様子を見た方がいいかも。誰だって一人になりたい時はあるものだ。
It's odd that she would say this given that she's tied to Hikari, and that left her in want of companionship ever since she was born. Tailmon was often alone, but she never truly wanted to be alone. Nevertheless, Taichi urges everyone to find Yamato immediately, insisting that their mission requires all 8 chosen children in order to succeed.
早くヤマトを見つけなきゃ。俺たちは8人揃ってなきゃダメなんだから。
8人揃ったからって ったって。みんな、ミミちゃん。
Back at Pinokimon's mansion, the Dark Master had been left to pick up the remains of his trash playroom. And in this scene, Pinokimon's head is drooped in sadness, leaving one to feel badly for the Dark Master in his misery, despite everything. The moment, however, doesn't last, as Pinokimon's melancholy quickly turns to animosity. Scouring the forest for the children, Pinokimon soon comes across Yamato and Gabumon. The Dark Master is set to pounce on them, but is stayed by Cherrymon, a large tree whose features are remarkably similar to those of the Great Deku Tree from The Legend of Zelda, The Ocarina of Time. And incidentally, The Ocarina of Time was released about half a year before Digimon Adventure. Now, if one reads the bios for various Digimon online, one will also discover that Pinokimon was apparently built from the body of a cursed Cherrymon. It's thought that a fiendish hacker had constructed Pinokimon from Cherrymon's data, and while that information isn't allotted to Digimon Adventure, there is certainly some kind of kinship shared between these two wooden Digimon, and that may account for why Pinokimon allows Cherrymon his request here. And so Cherrymon bargains with Pinokimon to spare Yamato, suggesting that he would rather manipulate Yamato to his own ends. Afterward, Pinokimon departs and will later discover the other children trudging through the forest. Foregoing his playful antics, Pinokimon orders a squad of Garbamon to attack the children here. And much like the Numamon of Episode 6, Garbamon are Digimon whose mainline offense is to throw their own poop. One wonders if a fight here with these joke minions was supposed to juxtapose the otherwise serious tone of the scenes featuring Cherrymon and Yamato. The Garbamon proceed to fire their fecal matter from their bazookas, but there Mimi manages to catch one without being harmed. The moment is made even more bizarre as the children continue to regard the poop as a dangerous implement, despite Mimi's ability to easily catch it like so. That being said, the situation may be granted a bit more tension since the Garbamon just so happen to be perfect level monsters. And disregarding their jokey poop bazookas, the cans they hobble around in are based on Windows Recycle Bin or Apple's trash applications, where deleted files or folders may be placed. The most dangerous implement at their disposal, no pun intended, are these garbage cans which contain localized black holes. And so while the entire conflict with the Garbamon is underway, we cut back to Yamato and Gabumon. Now ever since he left the others, Yamato was taken to scowling. He walks despondently alongside a lake, hands in pockets and head held low. He refuses even to acknowledge Gabumon's fussing over his well-being. Eventually, however, Yamato does take a seat and lays things out. And much of what he says I have gone over in short detail. Yamato saw it as his duty to protect Takeru, but he was blind to the fact that Takeru had matured over the course of their adventures.
でもいつの間にかタケルは成長してたんだよな。俺なんか必要としないくらいに。
Furthermore, he extends that this change is not simply evident in Takeru, but in everyone else as well. Everyone except for himself. Now, there's no sense in my picking that apart, since the point of his saying this is that it indicates Yamato has become irrational within his despair, and so naturally Gabumon protests his cynicism. Yet Yamato continues to pout, and he believes that the only way he'll truly change is that if he goes his own way, separate from the others. And at this pivotal moment, Cherrymon makes his approach and introduces himself. Although Gabumon readily identifies the old tree as allied with Pinokimon, Cherrymon assures them that he only came to talk. Initially, Yamato refuses, but at Cherrymon's insistence, he eventually complies. Now, a key problem with the Dark Master's arc, as I've said over and over, is in how short it is. And as such, we aren't given any of the motivating factors behind Cherrymon's want to manipulate Yamato here. Now, one might assume this is all within Cherrymon's nature, no pun intended. But being a tree, he wants to plant seeds. Not just the literal ones, but seeds of doubt, which is what he intends with Yamato here. And of course, he wants to please his master. But that all being said, the rate at which the story moves this plot point along is far too quick, and leaves one reeling from the whiplash as Yamato is made to turn against his friends. Cherrymon reveals he had been listening to Yamato rant beforehand and advises him to look deep within himself for the answers he seeks. Stubborn as ever, Yamato demands clarification, to which Cherrymon tells him to seek out and defeat his rival. The old tree then beckons Yamato to look into the nearby lake, and despite Gabumon's protests, Yamato does as he's asked. And there, reflected upon the water's surface, is an image of Tai Chi, and that comes as a shock to both Yamato and Gabumon. Yamato then forces a derisive laugh and rejects the notion that Tai Chi is his rival, but Cherrymon continues to manipulate him and says that the lake will only show him what's already in his heart. But how was Cherrymon even aware of any of the ongoing strife between Tai Chi and Yamato? I mean, his ploy thoroughly relies on it. Are we led to believe that the lake truly does function in the manner described, and Yamato's harboring a grudge against Tai Chi was indeed being reflected here? If so, that's all very convenient and plot-specific. Moreover, while one may buy into Yamato's grudge with Tai Chi, Cherrymon will also have turned him against the rest of the children as well, including Takeru. So even if one can justify turning Yamato against Tai Chi, telling him that the bond he shared with the other children meant nothing is completely ludicrous. Nevertheless, Yamato allows himself to be exploited by this stranger he met only a few moments ago. Again, extending the length of the Dark Master's arc may have allowed more of these elements to make sense. But what we're left with here is a hasty setup, and so due digital world magic, Yamato will be turned to a bad guy for a time, thereby giving the writers an excuse to see our two ultimate level Digimon partners compete in a contest of strength. The only other problem with this entire plot point is that Gabumon vehemently disagreed with everything Cherrymon was saying, but will just as quickly about-face and encourage Yamato to take up his axe. In fact, Gabumon goes so far as to say he will engage Yamato's former friends as if they were his enemies. Admittedly, Gabumon's words are meant to show his utter loyalty to Yamato, solidifying their friendship and allowing Gabumon to warp evolve once again. Note he also evolves correctly and not into a virus alternative. PT Theorist has a theory as to why Gabumon evolved naturally here. For every time we've seen Yamato's crest glow, it was not because he felt he was a good friend to someone else, but because he felt someone else was a good friend to him. That also explains why his crest did not glow when he wanted to question Kiwimon, because in that moment he felt everyone else was going against him. In this case here, Gabumon has pledged his full support for Yamato despite his misgivings about it, which Yamato greatly appreciated. YouTube user Matthew Williams also shares these sentiments. It's an argument further solidified by the fact that Yamato did not force anything like Tai Chi had done with Agumon back in episode 16. It was Gabumon who offered his loyalty and trust in Yamato. Yamato genuinely needed someone to be his friend in that moment, and Gabumon gave him that unconditionally. And despite all these very valid points, I'm still of a mind to say a dark evolution should have occurred for the sake of coloring Yamato's actions as being wrong from the outset. Considering this doesn't happen, one is otherwise left with the idea that Yamato wasn't wrong, and that he just had a different opinion on how to go about things. Well, anyway, Gabumon evolves into Metal Garurumon and takes off with Yamato. And as Cherrymon sees them off, he's left in awe of the strength of their bond. Cherrymon will find Pinokimon at the side of a river, cleaning the remains of poop from his face due to the recent battle in the forest. And there the old tree boasts of the success of his plan, which excites the Dark Master greatly. Yet Cherrymon also issues a warning to Pinokimon.
侮ればピノッキモン様といえど負けるかもしれませんぞ。彼らはピノッキモン様に足りないものを持っております。
僕に足りないもの。この僕に足りないものがあるっていうの？
But even as the old tree is about to explain himself,
僕に足りないものなんかないんだ！ブリッドハンマー！
Referring back to the bios for Pinokimon and Cherrymon, the Dark Master's killing him here would be essentially no different than a son killing his father. And that too may hold thematic value in relation to Yamato, Takeru, and their parents. A perpetual cycle of division and subtraction, and will further lead him to dividing the chosen children. Now, this isn't to say that Yamato has to kill his actual father, but rather he feels he needs to wrest himself from his current constraints. He needs to defeat Tai Chi because Tai Chi has become the father figure for the chosen children. Now, when Yamato regroups with the others, he finds them in the middle of their fight with the Garbamon. Metal Garurumon finishes off the remaining enemies, and what is at first assumed to be a happy reunion turns sour. Yamato then stares down Tai Chi and demands satisfaction through combat. Everyone else shares a moment of Nanda Korea before Joe tries reasoning with Yamato, and some forced drama ensues. Joe wants to cite the fact that they're all chosen children is the reason they're all friends, but that was never the reason they became friends. Rather, it was their continual reliance upon each other for survival throughout their journeys that was the main contributor to their forming the bonds that lasted them until now. And for some, like Tai Chi and Sora, they had been friends before they ever set foot in the digital world. Yet Joe's words would have one believe otherwise, that the mission to save the two worlds was the basis for their friendship, when that really isn't true at all. Nevertheless, what Joe is conveniently turned into here is a straw man, as Yamato's counter-argument is as simple as claiming they don't even know who it was who chose them in the first place. He says there's no reason they should even be friends, thereby waving away the entire adventure's worth of experience from beginning until now. Taichi, who has never been good with words anyway, doesn't even argue against Yamato, and simply asserts that he's being irrational. And that is understandable, for Taichi doing the right thing was always a matter of course, and was never something he seemed to work through intellectually. But even as Taichi refuses to engage in Yamato's childish tantrum, he's nevertheless backed into a corner here. And one does wonder whether or not Yamato would have seriously killed Taichi outright in this moment if Taichi had outright refused to engage. What's clear is the writers want to make this conflict seem inevitable, that without question Yamato would have blasted Taichi. And there I also question whether or not the writers wanted to induce some merit into Yamato's actions. I've long thought this situation was poorly set up because no matter which way Yamato slices the apple, there's still two worlds at stake at this time. Personal issues would be secondary to global annihilation. And what's also poorly set up is that even granting Yamato's giving in to some digital world magical manipulation now, he will just as easily change back in just a few episodes thanks to more magical manipulation. And what this does in the long run is reduce the amount of agency his character even has in his decision making and growth. Ultimately, the story leaves this entire debacle wanting more fleshing out, more details that would give substance to Yamato's even giving himself up to the darkness in the first place. And it all comes back to that, doesn't it? The Dark Master's arc is very brief. Keep in mind this is also something that might have been better explored by the 2020 remake, if the 2020 remake had simply decided to be an extension or a retelling of stories here, but with the luxury of being able to go into it in more detail. Regardless, we get a fight between Cherrymon and Cherrymon, a battle in which neither one makes much headway against the other. With that being said, Cherrymon's dialogue would hint that he might be holding back given he has no reason to fight his former ally. Perhaps if he was treating the conflict a bit more seriously, one wonders if he was the one who would have actually prevailed here. But even as the two ultimates fight each other in the air, Taichi and Yamato start a fist fight on the ground. And Taichi promotes his every blow as coming on behalf of all the Digimon who gave their lives for the children and their mission. And what's remarkable here is a notable shift in Taichi's demeanor, as he reveals he's been just as affected by the loss of their friends as anyone else has. Stoically, however, he kept his feelings to himself, instead focusing his energies on their enemies rather than wallow in sadness and hopelessness like Mimi and Yamato had chosen to. The man that Taichi has become is what Yamato envies, and so must conquer. And that's the thematic value of this entire conflict, despite the practical idiocy of it. But Taichi's words will weigh on Yamato's shoulders heavily, to the extent that even as he continues to wail on Taichi, his fighting has become erratic, driven by his anger. Now Sora's lack of input in this conflict is glaring and leaves one wanting. Considering she was often the tiebreaker between the two boys, the fact that she isn't putting herself between them at this point is a missed opportunity to give her character a bit more presence. Sora's role in the ongoing adventure has, thus far, been fairly diminished. A potential resolution might see her crest activation do her attempting to break up the fight, perhaps even at the risk of her own life, even as Cherrymon and Cherrymon blast each other overhead. And there perhaps a surprise warp evolution for Pinokimon would set the grounds for some kind of group resolution. And that would also work in thematic fashion given how Phoenixes work. Instead, the situation is resolved via Deus Ex Machina. Quite literally, in fact, given what homeostasis is. While everyone else is distracted by the ongoing fighting, Hikari decides to wander off as she's being led by a voice that she had heard earlier. And then she discovers a series of lights beaming through the canopy above. And then, as if by instruction, she holds out her crest, an action that causes her body to become completely enveloped by a mysterious light. Following that, she and the other children and their Digimon partners are all whisked away. They will have been brought into another realm, so to speak, where they can finally meet homeostasis, the entity that brought the children into the digital world in the first place. But that entire ordeal shall be covered within its own video. For now, we continue with the Pinokimon storyline. After concluding their meeting with homeostasis, the children are returned to Pinokimon's forest, where Taichi extends a hand in friendship to Yamato, attempting to mend things. For the entire meeting with homeostasis has allotted Taichi a base from which he can prove the chosen children truly do have a collective purpose to fulfill in the digital world. But that being said, I'll repeat here that the veracity of the prophecy was never the issue here, and Yamato's even bringing it up was irrelevant to the fact that the children had already established ties even before they were set on this mission. In reality, Yamato's issues stemmed from his jealousy, his want to be like Taichi. And that jealousy, by extension, has also come about due to his parents' divorce. For even though Yamato and Takeru are not at fault for the divorce nevertheless has a tendency to instill guilt upon all parties involved, parents and children alike. For Takeru, this is far less of a degree given his age, but for Yamato, we've seen how the divorce has had a significant detrimental impact on his life. And given all that, one wonders why the writers would not have had Takeru say something here. Perhaps something that would have continued to contribute to the growth of his character. But it all comes back to that. The Dark Masters arc is left wanting. Much of this stuff needed room to move and breathe. And this is what the 2020 remake could have been. In the end, however, Yamato will disregard Tai Chi and tells him that he believes there's never really a right or wrong way of doing things, and that he intends on finding his own way, set apart from the others. And at that, Yamato apologizes and takes his leave. And in a roundabout way, this is the conclusion that Homeostasis had left the children with. To save the world, but to do so in a way they deemed most appropriate. Admittedly, not even Homeostasis knew the right way to go about conquering evil, and so left it up to the children to make those determinations for themselves. And that does make sense because Homeostasis is not this all-knowing, benevolent entity acting on pre-established moral tenets. It's not human, nor is it a Digimon. Homeostasis is simply a program that goes about trying to regulate a state of normalcy within the digital world. Essentially, it's Taoism. But in Yamato's shoes, one should have at least acknowledged that Tai Chi was actively striving for said goal and not content to feel sorry for himself. Tai Chi was the only child among the others who seemed eager to inject a fundamental purpose into what they were doing. Although if we're to go back even farther, it was Leomon who started that ball rolling back in episode 13. With the explanation about the prophecy and a chance to return home, Tai Chi eagerly led the others down a singular path that he deemed to be the correct one. And then as time went on, we reached episode 28, and the other children unanimously made Tai Chi their leader. They all had to admit they were lost without him. Aside from giving the show a bit more drama to chew on here, one also questions why it was now of all times that Yamato had decided to rock the boat. And here I'm reminded of an age-old dynamic, presented by Star Trek, with Kirk and Spock constantly going at each other as far as the correct method of approaching any given situation was. If we're to apply a similar dynamic to Tai Chi and Yamato, we have Tai Chi's approach, which is often pragmatic, to the point of being reckless, while Yamato's approach was safe, but at the fault of being overly cautious. The underlying question is, which way is the right way, and which way is the wrong way? And here one supposes there's no clear answer given. Yamato's departure will also see the chosen children splinter amidst differing ideologies. Seeing Yamato set off has Mimi making the same decision. Having been witness to all the pain and suffering others have gone through on her behalf, Mimi no longer wants any part of this and leaves. And Joe joins her. While he makes it out like she needs protection, the reality is that Joe simply hates conflict himself, and this is his excuse for jumping ship. One may imagine the Dark Masters arc would have played out far more naturally if the children had been made to fight their enemies over a much longer period of time, all building up to this very scenario. Mimi and Joe's leaving would have seemed far more likely given the weariness of the ongoing tragedies. But the problem here, as I've overstated, is that we're only a couple of episodes into the arc, and the events playing out now are coming right after the unified front the children placed against Vamdemon and his forces in the previous arc. Moreover, we'll see the chosen children reunited within the next 5 episodes anyway. All that is to say, what exactly is the worth of something torn asunder if it's so easily brought back together again shortly thereafter? Anyway, the show continues and we find Joe and Mimi having a meal together. One supposes their current course of action would be getting home somehow, but that's never brought to question. Instead, Mimi is still bothered about all that's happened and apologizes to Joe for her selfishness. And here Joe attempts to comfort her and refers to the old adage that fighting only leads to more fighting. Yet not even he is convinced by his own words, and he thinks of his brother in this instance, wondering what Shin would say. Their conversation is interrupted by a meteor that impacts nearby. And when they investigate, they discover a fallen Ogremon. While Joe suggests they leave him behind, Mimi's heart goes out to the fallen creature and she attempts to mop the blood from his face with a rag. Watching Mimi try to help their former enemy inspires Joe to action, and so he puts his doctoring skills to use. Ogremon's arm is then placed within a makeshift sling, which Joe constructs from a bunch of industrial-strength toilet paper. Left confused at their actions, Ogremon demands to know why the children would help him, given he had tried to kill them in the past. Here, Mimi and Joe's human influence and kindness bring about a distinct change in Ogremon's overall disposition, and this is also reminiscent of Tailmon's having helped a fallen Wizardmon in the past, giving him water and aiding in his recovery. That was probably the only time in Wizardmon's life that another Digimon showed him any degree of kindness, and one supposes that was wholly due Tailmon's being connected to Hikari in some way, attributes that made Tailmon more than just an average Digimon. Left tongue-tied, Ogremon manages a thank you right before he is overwhelmed with emotion, and his sobbing only goes to show that behind his tough exterior, the big ogre is apparently quite tender-hearted, very tsundere indeed. How fortunate then that Angemon had spared Ogremon his wrath during the battle with Devimon back on File Island, for if not for that, then Ogremon would never have been set on this path to redemption. Before long, however, Pinokimon discovers their party, and he intends to kill them all. And while Palmon urges Mimi to allow her to evolve and defend everyone, Mimi explicitly forbids it, too afraid that Pinokimon will kill her partner in an instant. Nevertheless, Joe decides to put up the only defense they have available at this point, namely Zudomon. Unfortunately for Zudomon, David beats Goliath in this case. Two hammers clash, and Pinokimon's weapon proves to be the stronger instrument. Although it may have been interesting to see the opposite occur, and Pinokimon overcomes Zudomon via other means. The only reason I say so is because there are special properties to Digimon abilities that might give them an edge over others, despite the evolutionary disparities. Now, Pinokimon is about to go in for the kill, but is presently interrupted by the echoing call of another creature swinging through the trees. The newcomer soon reveals himself to be Etemon, come back from the grave. Except now, he's Metal Etemon. Although he was thought to have been destroyed by Metal Greymon in episode 20, Metal Etemon reveals that he was actually blown into another dimension, similar to what had happened with Tai Chi. Whatever this other dimension did to Etemon, he refers to it as hell, claiming his body was torn apart and remade several times over. But he completely glosses over the fact that he somehow just came back.
What the hell happened to you?
You tell me! One minute I'm going in for a job interview, and next minute, boom! I'm in hell! Devil sent me back here in his lower life form, said I gotta earn my way up the ladder.
What ladder?
The hell ladder, you potato cracker mutt gut! Which ladder you think, man?
Nevertheless, what matters is he is back, and this time far more powerful than he ever was. But even after having gone through all hell's torment, Metal Etemon seems just as jocular as he ever was. Albeit, he's also still just as much a thug as he ever was. And while his vendetta may be set against the children, Metal Etemon's carefree attitude only serves to enrage Pinokimon. And so the two ultimates turn to fighting one another. Looney Tune antics follow thereafter, with Metal Etemon tossing banana peels and even farting in Pinokimon's face. Indeed, the writers for Digimon Adventure have very odd ways of intermixing these tense situations with comedy. While taking advantage of the distraction, the children and their Digimon make a run for it, with Ogremon tagging along. Later they will find another refuge, and so Mimi and Joe are left to continue bonding with Ogremon. And here we get some insight into Ogremon's rivalry with Leomon, and the tsundere attribution shows itself to be more and more appropriate. Ogremon has a great respect for Leomon, even though he also admits that they are eternally enemies. Here Mimi points out this is a contradiction, but Ogremon insists it's all part of some grander scheme. It's destiny. There's an interesting comparison being made here with the rivalry between Leomon and Ogremon, and the ongoing mission of the Chosen Children. You see, although Mimi and Joe have caught Ogremon in a logical fallacy, being that he's involved in a conflict with no clear resolution, Joe and Mimi are also caught within the same fallacy themselves. They're ignoring their destiny, their duty of averting the digital world of its current crisis. Speaking of Leomon, Mimi and Joe will encounter him during their flight from Metal Etemon, and amazingly, Leomon comes to them newly evolved. He has now become Saber Leomon. It was an evolution made possible thanks to having been continually exposed to the Digivices during the File Island arc. And there, having recognized their old friend, the children climb atop his back and make a hasty getaway, and Ogremon does his best to follow behind. Saber Leomon will then take the children to a heap of ruined buildings, trashed during the massive geographical changes throughout the digital world. Here the colors of the landscape have also been muted. Nevertheless, Joe and Gomamon are keen to recognize Digitamamon's restaurant from episode 23, although it too has been rendered completely derelict. Within the restaurant, the party decides to take refuge. Once inside, Saber Leomon reverts back to his adult form, and Mimi embraces him. Leomon reveals that while his evolution was made possible by his exposure to the light of evolution, he's still unable to fully maintain his transformations. And Ogremon, of course, envily scoffs at his rival, and even rashly attempts to fight him here. But he is easily overpowered. Mercifully, Leomon suggests the ogre heal from his injuries first. Now, Etemon and Gekomon also happen to be hiding beneath the floorboards of the restaurant, the same creatures Mimi had encountered back in Tano-sama Gekomon's castle back in episode 25. Recognizing Mimi here, they tragically recount the destruction of their castle in the wake of the Dark Masters. Mimi's conscience is stung by the revelation, and Leomon reminds her and Joe of their purpose within the digital world. Here the dialogue implies that Leomon had taken the fight to his enemies all by himself, where he went and slaughtered many of the Dark Master's minions while searching for the children. Later on we'll see that Andromon had done much of the same in Mugendramon's realm. All this goes to show Mimi the reality of the ongoing plight of the digital world, as if that wasn't already obvious. And while it was her intent to abandon her mission because of all the bloodshed has only continued regardless, and will continue if she and the other children don't do something about it. There's also some dialogue here that implies the children's arriving at File Island was a stroke of great fortune, as the Dark Masters were otherwise unaware of their presence. On File Island, the children's fight against Devimon had also afforded them an ideal testing ground while they were all at their weakest states. Here and now, they're actually stronger than ever, so there's no excuse for them not to take the fight to its most obvious conclusion. And despite all of this, Mimi and Joe remain unconvinced. The only method then that will serve to move their hearts is an act of sacrifice. In the middle of their conversation, Metal Etemon storms in. Leomon evolves here and does battle with the ape, all while telling the children to make a run for it. However, Mimi stays, unwilling to fight but also unwilling to leave her friend behind. Just then, Mimi is nearly hit by one of Metal Etemon's attacks, and Saber Leomon leaps in its path in an effort to protect her, sustaining a mortal wound as he does so. Then Gomamon evolves into Zudomon and attempts to breach Metal Etemon's armored flesh with lightning. However, the ape proudly declares his skin is made entirely of chrome digizoid. Lightning will have no effect on him. Upon hearing this, Zudomon then tosses his hammer at Metal Etemon's chest, and rather than dodge or block the blow, the ape foolishly decides to absorb it full on, believing himself completely invulnerable. However, to his surprise, Metal Etemon's chest begins to crack wide open, and as the cavity continues to rupture, Zudomon then reveals that his hammer also happens to be made of chrome digizoid as well. Taking advantage of the moment, Saber Leomon closes in for one final attack, which brings a swift end to their adversary. With that battle concluded, the end result will be covered shortly. For now, we switch back to Taichi's group. As we know, Tai Chi had made plans to invade Pinokimon's mansion. Even so, since the departure of 3 of their original party, Tai Chi has not been left unaffected, and Sora seems to sense it. Now here's a good opportunity for some character development between them, but sadly the arc is continually rushed and has our characters pushing forward regardless. Take a shot every time I mention this. When they reach the outside of Pinokimon's mansion, the children encounter a Floramon and Daramon. And although the children initially assume the pair are hostile, Floramon and Daramon eventually reveal that they were actually forced to be Pinokimon's playmates against their wills. In fact, Floramon and Daramon both state they absolutely hate Pinokimon.
これだけの話であるが、実は我が輩たちはピノキモンが大嫌いなのである。そうだ、思い出したである。ピノキモンには友達がいなかったである。そうそう。
Among many of the interactions the children will have throughout the show, the conversation with Daramon stands as one of the best, simply because of minute attention to such details as giving these personality traits to even the most minor of characters.
本当？じゃあピノキモンってかわいそうなやつであるね。
もう真似しなくていいのに。
It's a moment that sticks out and it's very cute. Daramon also becomes far more distinct in one's mind because of the way he speaks. And what works well here is that we become that much more personally invested in the ongoing plight of the digital world. We care about these characters, even though we just met them.
一つ念をしておくである。ピノキモンには内緒である。
Hatching a plan, Tai Chi and the others decide to use the mansion's own defenses against Pinokimon. And when the Dark Master returns to his house, Tai Chi's group, alongside with Daramon and Floramon, fire a large cannon at Pinokimon. The former minions then pour ample amounts of pent-up resentment into every shot. Nevertheless, Pinokimon draws ever closer, up until the children have no choice but to engage him in close quarters. To counter their numbers, the Dark Master proceeds to summon a horde of red Vegimon to attack them. This leaves Tai Chi and Wargreymon to square off with Pinokimon personally. Wargreymon initiates with his Dramon killers, which is strange since Pinokimon obviously isn't a Dramon type. Regardless, Pinokimon simply counters the attack and then resorts to controlling Wargreymon with his puppet strings. And while the Dark Master has been successful in his ability to manipulate lesser Digimon, Wargreymon is still ultimate level and therefore employs a greater amount of resistance. Said resistance affords the others time to act. And eventually Pinokimon has his strings vaporized. That and his prized bullet hammer is also wrested from his grasp and destroyed. Surrounded and outmatched, Pinokimon now realizes what he had never thought was possible, that he may lose. And in this moment his thoughts go out to the fallen Cherrymon, who had warned him about how powerful the children were. However, his true nature is left unabated. The Dark Master makes one last stand against the children by activating a failsafe within his house, and he turns the entire building into a mobile engine of destruction. And while the children are made to deal with this new threat, Pinokimon cuts his losses and flees. Now, one of the red Vegemon who would also escape begs Pinokimon to take him with him, but the Dark Master just kills him outright. It's an act that is purely capricious, unnecessary, and childish. However, all is exactly what defines Pinokimon, and retribution for his evil is soon to follow. Unbeknownst to Pinokimon, Yamato was there and had watched the entire ordeal from afar. And when Pinokimon sees Metal Garurumon, he eagerly orders the wolf to attack War Greymon, as he did before. However, Metal Garurumon does not heed the Dark Master. Angrily, Pinokimon lashes out with his puppet strings again, but is astonished to see that they have no effect.
なんでだよ。どうして僕の術が効かないんだよ。
当たり前だ。仲間を平気で殺すようなやつの言うことなんか聞けるはずないだろう。
Thus, the Dark Master is completely undone. All his toys, tricks, and clever antics are for naught against the likes of the chosen children. Even so, at his weakest state here, Pinokimon's insanity bids him to lunge at Yamato in a rage, despite the futility of it. And the cold breath of hell is all that awaits the Dark Master as Metal Garurumon brings an end to him at last. And within his final moments, Pinokimon considers Cherrymon's words. Words that he never truly understood, nor believed. Not even now. Soon after Pinokimon's death, his house falls to pieces. The other children then find Yamato and see what he's done, and although Sora looks at him pleadingly, Yamato leaves with a guilty look on his face. With the loss of the second Dark Master, the forest instance of Spiral Mountain begins to disappear, in the same manner as Metal Cedarmon's ocean. And now we cut back to a dying Leomon, and all parties present are weeping for him. However, Leomon points over Yon at the forest region unraveling itself from Spiral Mountain, noting the Dark Master's defeat. Even so, Mimi continues to cry over him. Leomon can only reassure her of his pending rebirth, and he also apologizes to Ogremon for what it's worth. His death will have brought a temporary end to their ongoing rivalry. And then the noble warrior evaporates, his data scattered amidst the wind like so many other Digimon who sacrifice themselves for the children. Leomon's death was also very impactful back in its time, a death that has since become reoccurring for the Digimon franchise, almost mimetically so. Note, I'm not attempting to downplay its significance when I say this, I'm just noting there's something particularly impactful about the death of a noble lion. Something Christ-like. After Leomon dies, Joe then proposes they go to the Village of Beginnings to see their friends reborn, but there's a problem. Ogremon tells them that the village has also been destroyed thanks to the Dark Masters. And so unless they are to defeat their enemies, none of the Digimon who died will be reborn. And that's all Joe needs to hear before he's resolved to get back into the fight, and he urges Mimi to follow him. And given all that has transpired, Mimi finally becomes convinced. Naturally, Ogremon also decides to officially join them, suggesting they find others as well and build an army. Otamamon and Gekomon are also eager to tag along, although the only condition Mimi has is that they call her by her name, and not Princess. And this brings an end to the Pinokimon section of the Dark Master's arc, the best of the 4 sections of the arc. Pinokimon remains one of the more memorable villains of the entire show, and the series in general. He's a villain who provides the chosen children with a mirror into themselves even as they try to come of age. Throughout Digimon Adventure, the villains, while set against the chosen children, also act out of a perverse attraction to humanity. After all, humans are powerful creatures, and their connections to Digimon cause these instantaneous evolutions to occur. That is power, and it is for that power that evil hungers.
彼らはピノキモン様に足りないものを持っております。
For Pinokimon, we see he sought out Takeru as a playmate and attempted to mediate a game between them. And although the game turned out to be just another means of the Dark Master's abuse of control, there was yet still this subconscious desire to form a connection. And notice Pinokimon reacts severely to Takeru's telling him that he has no friends. His face falls and there's this look of earnest despondence, as if the Dark Master truly does desire nothing more than an actual playmate. Yet for all the appearance of earnestness, there was no changing the Dark Master's most basic nature, and his soullessness is only displayed further when the best friend he could conjure for Takeru was this hideous hodgepodge he built out of various toys in his basement. Of all the minions he could have used to boast his supposed friendship, he instead builds an amalgam of toys. Ultimately, in the mind of the Dark Master, it seems there was no difference between the two. Everything and everyone is just his toy in the end, an object for him to control. Yet the irony is Pinokimon himself is but a toy a marionette boasting his own set of churning wooden gears. He's completely detached from morality, and he subjugates others in a manner that is wholly sociopathic and self-serving. Yet all is tailored by childishness. Pinokimon has no lofty ambitions, nor does he have any far-stretching goals, and there he exists in the moment, marking his every action as capricious and without ethical restraint. But his infantile behaviors also work in contrast with some character growth from Takeru. And there we have our thesis and antithesis. Very well set up. Now, if there's anything left wanting about this section of the Dark Master's arc, it's how forcefully the writing works to make Yamato out to be a bad guy. And much of that I have also attributed to the convenient plot-specific magic of the digital world coming to bear upon him. The problem with this is that this subjects everything that Yamato has experienced to the whims of said magic. When does organic character growth come about? Just think about the convenience of this entire situation. Yamato happens to run into Cherrymon just out of the blue, and Cherrymon arbitrarily wants to subject him to this lake that just so happens to have properties that are relevant to Yamato's current state of being. It's all part of what makes the arc feel rushed and last minute. Now, YouTube user Benjamin Peters believes Cherrymon should have done a cold read on Yamato and used that information to turn him against Tai Chi, thereby exploiting his fear of losing his friends, and also his insecurities about Tai Chi's relationship with Takeru. Benjamin also mentions that having Gabumon evolve into his virus counterpart would have been cool too, and more consistent with the way virus evolutions ought to work, and those are sentiments I can wholly get behind as well. And as we know, Cherrymon is affected by these interactions with Yamato, even as the old tree had tried to deceive him. This too would indicate how strongly humans can affect Digimon. Yet Pinokimon could not even begin to understand human behavior. And that too was interesting to consider when Pinokimon kills Cherrymon. The Dark Master felt like he was being insulted, of course, but he may have also been motivated by envy for how Cherrymon had picked up on what made the children so special. Now, while I don't believe Mimi would have ever left the other children for practical reasons, I do realize it was purposeful in a thematic sense. Her and Joe's entire encounter with Ogremon would not have taken place unless Mimi had decided to aid him and get to know him. Much like any of the Digimon in the digital world, Ogremon is a victim of his own programming. And something we're also made aware of later on is Ogremon's virus attribute lends to his hostile nature. Genai will tell the children that virus-type Digimon are not inherently evil, they just have an uglier disposition. Much like having a rude friend, but he's still your friend because you know he's still got a good heart. More points of contention in this section are the fight with Agabumon and Etemon's sudden return to the digital world, at a pivotal moment no less. And as I said before, one gets the feeling that these joke Digimon were implemented to offset some of the more serious events, such as Yamato's drama and Pinokimon's relentless hunt. Etemon in particular arrives completely arbitrarily and is thrown away almost immediately afterwards. And the fact that he returns at all devalues the success of Metal Greymon's victory over him in episode 20. At the same time, to give credit for how the writers worked him into this story, Metal Etemon is brought to an ignoble end. Arrogantly, Etemon would often boast that he was the king of the Digimon, and the kanji on Metal Etemon's chest reads strongest. And so, in an incredibly humiliating fashion, his weakness is also exposed by a Digimon who just so happens to be one evolutionary tier below his. Such an end is fitting for one so puffed up as Etemon. That being said, YouTube user crazyYouTuber13 believes that Leomon should have been killed by Pinokimon instead, and Metal Etemon should not have even factored into the arc whatsoever. Of course, if he had to be, he fights with War Greymon again, which would be much more thematic since they'd be having an epic rematch. And then we leave it to Leomon to save Yamato and Mimi from the depths of their despair, only to be happened upon by Pinokimon, who fights and kills Leomon. Then we cue Gabumon's warp evolution, and he fights and defeats the Dark Master in glorious vengeance. I like this idea. YouTube user ConchoMirox12 also notes that Pinokimon's death isn't even played as a victorious moment, which is interesting and makes him that much more of a memorable villain. As Pinokimon had said before, dying for real is what makes the game fun. Yet, in the end, no fun has been had. All is depicted as tragic, even the death of this evil wooden puppet. Indeed, one of the more haunting moments of the show occurs within the few short moments of Pinokimon's death. For in the throes of his death, the pitch of his voice falters and the gears on his back slowly grind to a halt. Despite everything, Pinokimon's death occurs in a manner that evokes a tragedy has occurred rather than justice has been served. If there's a warning to us conveyed by the writers of Digimon Adventure, it would be not to dissimulate reality from fantasy, but to treat playtime as one would reality. For playtime is to treat the world as if everything one does is without consequence. An instance of this would be Tai Chi believing he is invincible after Koshiro discovers their bodies are made of data, and so he starts playing games with Etemon and his minions, and that inevitably leads to Sora being kidnapped. The idea here is one of detachment, and how thinking one is detached from reality does not necessarily make that true.
彼らはピノキモン様に足りないものを持っております。
僕に足りないものそんなもんあるわけないさ。
Some of this works into the nature of technology, especially digital technology and its propensity to cause us to become detached from our reality. And another concept at work here is control. For a puppet is an object made to be controlled, yet in Pinokimon's case, the opposite is true. Note also there are a set of gears built within Pinokimon's back, and we're made exceedingly aware of their existence as they churn and grind to a halt when Pinokimon dies. Indeed, gears, not unlike the structures embedded within the crust of File Island. File Island, the birthplace of all Digimon, was also a proving ground from whence the chosen children were to rise from their infancy. But using said gears, we know that Devimon was afforded control over the island and its inhabitants. And that influence further infers how machines may even be used to assert power and control over others. We make and control the machines, but machines may be used to control and unmake us. In the long run, the writers of Digimon Adventure leave one to question who or what is truly in control here. Are we riding the winds of destiny like Tai Chi, or are we being manipulated by the trees like Yamato? An interesting detail about that is Yamato, of all the children, is the one who brings an end to the Dark Master. We know that Yamato had allowed himself to be reined in by Cherrymon and essentially made a puppet for the old tree. And while Yamato has become something of a nomad at this point, what's for sure is that his will no longer belongs to the whims of Pinokimon or his minions. And so how thematically appropriate for Pinokimon to have been outdone by the one wielding the crest of friendship. And so if you found you enjoyed this channel's content, give the video a like and subscribe to Rusty Cheese Knife. In addition, you may also support me through Patreon or Cash App, and the links for both may be found in this video's description. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for more.